committee, I may well be able to deliver it in a nice, fluent way. All right, so here goes. Ia mātou e whiriwhiri ana I ngā take kei mua ia o mātou araro. I pono ana mātou kei kaha, tono kui te whakapau mahara hua pai mo nā hapuri I mahi ne mātou. Me kaha hoki mātou, katoa ki whai fua kia tautiki ta mātou mahi. A mā te maia, te turu whakamaru, me te hiri kei tea te arihi, I roto te kotahitanga me te aroha. Okay. Kora. Okay. Apologies and so on. Sorry, for those who are present, welcome. We've got some people online before I begin. Mark de Haast, our General Manager, Finance, Corporate Services is online. Deputy Mayor Lawrence Kirby, you're online, is that right? He was online shortly. Yes. He is online. Sam Nicol for Ernst & Young. Online. And you there, Sam? No, not yet. Not yet. He will be online. And Sam Ketley from AON Insurance Brokers will also be here later on for the agenda item. All right. Apologies. Just one thing I want to raise, and that concerns Councillor Glenn Cooper's apology for the last meeting. He did endeavour to attend and did endeavour to give an apology, but this has not been received. So I would like to move that we accept a retrospective apology from Councillor Cooper. All in favour say aye, contrary no. Can somebody move and second it? Just somebody who moved it. Jocelyn seconded it. Who moved it? Liz did, all right? Yep. Okay, fine, fine, right, okay. Well done, thank you. Are there any declarations of interest relating to items on the agenda from any of the elected members present? There are none, all right. We have public speaking time allocated. I'd like to call to the table Mr. Conrad Peterson, who was asked to speak to the meeting, in particular concerning item 8.7 and the top 10 organisational risk report. And we all find it on our relevant page. Please take a seat, Mr. Peterson, at the table. We need a microphone, though, Mr. Peterson, yes.
I can hear you. Here we go.
Oh, so now it's on. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Conrad Peterson. I'm a Paraparaumu Beach resident. Again, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I acknowledge the presence of Chief Executive Edwards and his team. My reason for asking to speak today, and as the Chairman has already said, it is in respect of item 8.7. We are talking here about the top 10 organisational risks in KCD. This report has been, as I understand it, produced by Sharon Foss, and it's been authorised by the Group Manager Corporate Services. To focus on the particular point of interest to myself, and that's 8.7, we are looking here at an item not necessarily in its top order of importance or anything, and that is failure to prudently manage the Council's financial stability, including fraudulent activity. My question, or I wish to understand, does that include loans that the Council makes? I wish to understand that. Does that item include loans the Council might make?
I think the answer is yes. It's part of overall financial position of the Council. Debt, liabilities and assets are part of the whole issue. So I think the short answer to your question is yes, it does.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to be absolutely clear on that. In which case, then, I would submit to this committee that ratepayers' money that is loaned to body corporates, as is currently happening, without any kind of security, is totally, it's just not on. This is ratepayers' money. What I'm talking about here, we'll name one, and that is the $500,000 that is on loan to Air Chathams. This is a loan that is not secured. We have $500,000 of ratepayers' money at risk. That's all I wish to say, Mr. Chairman. In respect of my information, it is, of course, oral advice from within this organisation. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you. I think that I would just quickly ask the Chief Financial Officer to comment on what information is or is not disclosed about this particular loan.
Sorry?
I was just saying that I'm going to ask the Chief Financial Officer to comment briefly on what information is or is not disclosed about this loan that you refer to. Mark? Yes. Is Mark online?
Jing is the Chief Financial Officer. If
Jing.
you want her to-
I'll ask Jing, our Chief Financial Officer, to respond. Thank you. Thank you, Jing.
Is it on? Yeah, it is. Right. So the $500,000 in Chatham's loans, which is clearly said in the last annual report, if we've said that we loaned to them, and it was actually a community response we had. We surveyed the residents about a few years ago about the airport position, and the community said they want the airport. That's how we loan them and to support them is community voice. So it's not a council choice. And last year, through the annual report process, and auditors required us to do impairment tests, which we have impaired, but doesn't mean they do not have the obligation. The Air Chathamans still have the obligation to repay this $500,000 loan. We are doing our annual report at the moment. We are still in contact with them and asking their financial viability at the moment. We have to do that impairment test every year. So that's my response. And Mark, if you want to add anything.
I think that's the answer we give you, Mr. Patterson. I don't know whether you want to pursue it at all.
With all due respect, thank you, Jack, for that. With all due respect to the emotion in giving these people money and helping them, all the rest of it, that's not my point. My point is there is $500,000 of ratepayers' money at risk. It's that simple. Now, it's either a matter for this committee or, well, I would have thought it was definitely a matter for this committee. That's why I'm here.
Thank you very much for that intervention. I think that's all we need to. I just want to respond and say that in terms of this being a matter for the committee, it is, of course, a matter for the committee to make sure this information is properly reported. The decision about whether to undertake such a loan, of course, is a matter for council itself through its own financial decisions and so on. And that is not a matter for this. This committee does not make decisions on spending. It makes decisions. Its role is to review the proper reporting of the council's financial position. All right.
I understand that, Mr. Chairman, but we're talking about prudent financial management here. Unsecured loans of $500,000, that is not prudent financial management.
Well, that would depend upon the state of as to whether the loan is impaired, as Jing has indicated, is something which will be examined as part of the ordinary financial review. And of course, our auditors will also be looking at that and how we report it in the annual financial statements. Right. So thank you for your intervention. I think you've made your point. I hope you think you've been listened to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And it will be recorded. What you've said will be recorded. Thank you. All right. Members' business, item 6, request for leave of absence. There's none. Matters of an urgent nature to be raised? No? Okay. Moving on with my run sheet. Item 7, updates. There are no updates scheduled for this meeting. Item 8, reports. Right. Firstly, health and safety quarterly report with Diane as the lead person here. Right? Thank you very much, Diane. We take it as read unless you want to make any particular comment or unless anyone has raised a question with you. All right?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I would just like to
respond to a question before we open for questions, which was raised by David here, around the tables on page 12 of the agenda, which is the worker reported incidents by type and the third party events by type. We're currently working through a process of upgrading and updating our reporting categories so that when we produce this report in a new format, which is more of a dashboard for you, which is going to be much more of a visual look and see than just having a list of numbers in a table, you'll see that there's some sort of discrepancies that, well, they're not discrepancies, they appear to be discrepancies when you look at them. So you'll see for the worker reported events by type, it says injuries 15, and then if you go down the list a bit, you'll see full triple slip 1. So, you know, it's reasonable to assume that if someone's had a full triple slip, they've had an injury, so they might be actually captured in the injury. So the purpose, the reason, the cause of the injury could be the full triple slip. But at the moment, the way our system is capturing that data, it's saying that one person had a full triple slip, which did not equate to an injury, but there were 15 injuries that required some form of first aid or medical attention. So what we're just trying to do is we're just trying to reorganise those categories so that they tell a much clearer story for you. For example, one of the ones that we've recently just made changes to is aggressive interactions, because as you will have read in the report and you'll know that we have experienced an increase in aggressive interactions from members of the public towards staff, towards yourselves, towards anything to do with council really. And so that is actually becoming an issue for us. So we're quite focused on that. So previously, aggressive interactions were seen as near misses because they actually didn't hurt anybody. Nobody had a visual, impact from it. But as we know, prolonged exposure to such aggressive interactions and unpleasant encounters can lead to long-term harm in the future. So that's why we've pulled that out and put that in its own box for ourselves. So we're still working through that. So that's why when you first read it through, you might think, oh, that doesn't actually make much sense. But if you flesh in all the detail behind it, we can see what's an injury, what's not an injury, and the story behind there. So hopefully, does that answer your question, David?
Yes, thank you. Yes, we do need to have something that tells us the difference between the difference. We need to know the separation between injuries and the events. So, did the vehicle events, were they injuries or non-injuries? I mean, at the moment, it doesn't tell you anything. It's a mix of causes and effects. And what you really need to know is, was a vehicle incident? Was it a major or minor? Did someone slip and sprain a finger, or were they concussed? Do you need serious or minor? That sort of thing, and just separate the causes and the consequences. Well, I mean, a theft probably had no injury. It'd be odd to get an injury in a theft, but what are they? An indoor environment. I mean, what on earth does that mean? And what we can't draw conclusions from what we've got. So if you can do it in a way that we can actually look at it and go, oh, things are getting better, things are getting worse. That's what we need to be able to do.
Thank you, David. And look, just to add to that, you notice in paragraph 2, the references there to the format of the current plan is being reviewed currently. And of course, the point did crop up in some discussions we had about when we talk about injuries, what's the severity of the injuries? If there's an accident to a vehicle, what was injured? What was the person damaged, or was the car damaged, or the vehicle damaged, or both? So there is scope to make it to make the information more meaningful, I think, which you accept, Diane. All right. Any other councillors?
Yes.
Jocelyn, you have an intervention.
I have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Liz, I couldn't see you. Yes, sorry.
That's all right. Look, I'm really keen to see the revised format. I just wondered if one could be sort of mocked up or something, so we can see what in future it will look like, and how we can hone in on the areas of concern and focus in on the actions that are being taken to address those. Because at the moment it comes across as just a bunch of statistics, and it's not that helpful in terms of making, being fully informed about, the current state of things. So I'm just wondering how quickly we could see at least a sort of a mock-up of what it might look like and be able to provide some feedback as to whether that's more useful or, you know, I mean, it might be a sort of an interactive thing in terms of designing the report.
We'll deal with all the questions at the end, right? Okay, you're next, Jocelyn. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, through the chair. So my question relates to, I suppose, the definition of third party on page, Appendix 1, page 14. So it says a person who does not hold employee status or a contractor work status. So I'm just trying to clarify whether or not that includes elected members or not, because they were mentioned in the preamble to this report.
So technically, a third party in this, sorry.
I was going to wait.
Oh,
Let's
yes,
wait for
sorry.
all the questions at the end. Councillor Cooper, you're next, right? Sorry.
Yes, I just had a question about, from an audit and risk perspective, in relation to the reliability of the data that actually creates the graphs and the information. So my question would be, are we using a digital platform, or are we still using a paper-based platform in terms of reporting near misses and incidents? So how is that data being collated from the ground, from our staff and our contractors and whatnot? And if we're not using digital and we're relying on old school paper-based reporting, are we comfortable that we're getting the reporting and the engagement in that process to an acceptable standard?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions? Right. Please answer.
Apologies, my head's in the previous zone. Councillor Coe, in terms of the draft for a new format, I have spoken with, I think you might have been away when we ran a workshop with Samantha Turner for refreshing the obligations. Oh, right. Yeah, right. So at that workshop, we did talk about when we got the draft to a point that it actually, you know, looked like this is taking us down this track. We were going to run a little session to introduce it, run you through it, get your questions, get your feedback. I had these great expectations that for the first quarter report of July that we would be ready, but due to resourcing and other hold-ups, we're not quite on track, but it is certainly in the plan. Councillor Provenov, third party. So third party technically, in terms of what we were reporting, is around employee and worker status. Elected members, they sort of sit to one side, but they are included in this report. So if we were to receive any reports of incidents from elected members, that would start to show up, but we haven't, so they're not. If you would like those to be reported in a separate category, we could do that.
Yes.
Thank you. I think maybe as councillors and elected members that would be a good conversation, because if it's actually a small number, then it might identify particular issues or individuals. So I suppose, so thank you for clarifying that, but in terms of the support that actually goes to elected members, so even though they're not included, actually they would be included in the numbers, what support would they potentially be getting that is also discussed in this paper?
So the way we have historically conducted our support for elected members around health and safety is we apply the same criteria and opportunities as we do for our own employees.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Cooper.
Yes.
Yes, reporting platform. If you'd asked me this about 3 years ago, it would have been a very long answer. No, we're not using paper-based reliance anymore. We have a health and safety management system which is called VAULT, V-A-U-L-T. It is a very, very extensive system and we use it a lot, but we still don't use it to its full capacity because it has so much reach. We also have a portal. So people can do their entries through the portal, they can do it online, or if they're stuck out in the field and they don't have, connectivity or something, they can do a form if they, really want to, and then they bring it back in and it gets entered. So our reliance is on our electronic data.
Great. So the reporting that we see here, is that out of Vault, or is that so that system's good, but the dashboard reporting is not so good?
Vault it comes prescribed with certain categories and sections, and in order to adjust those to suit your individual organisational needs, there's often a lot of work behind the scenes which can then affect the picking up and identification of other information which could have been entered under a different category that you now have decided that you're no longer looking at. So that's why we have had to be a bit careful the way we've staged the changes so that we're not losing anything. So we do a manual eye check over each incident as it comes in to make sure that it's being accurately allocated into the right category. And then once we've cleansed those categories, we introduce a new category, and then we will move them across. So we're confident that what we've got is good. It's just exactly where it's sitting at the moment. And in looking at this table, for example, the vehicle incidents, there were no injuries in those vehicle incidents. They were just reversing and bumping into the trailer that was in the next bay or something like that. But we need to be able to, as David alluded to, extrapolate a bit more information to tell the story of what these types of injuries are, and are there any trends coming from that. At the moment, we do that trend review manually.
Great. And just one last quick one. Does it have a capability to view engagement from your staff in the Vault? In terms of people looking at the hazard registers, people doing their toolbox meetings, does it have that capability?
We haven't got that active yet, but there is a capacity in there to bring in a whole lot of sort of compliance things, and at the moment we're not using that fully. What we're using is a different online system that we're introducing and rolling out, which is called Cognise, and that is something that when anybody accesses it, you can track who's accessed it, when they've accessed it, and are they current for the things that we have put against their role for the competence of their role. Like with lifeguards, they have to have a PLPC certificate that has to be active, that sort of thing, and we're just building that up now. And so we're getting there.
Okay, thank you very much, Diane, for that. I think we all accept that this is, as it stands, is perhaps a bit of a set-piece format of reporting at the moment and can be made more meaningful. So we look forward to seeing the revised format when it is ready. Thank you very much. I will now move that the Risk and Assurance Committee notes the Health and Safety or Quarterly Report for the period 1 April 23 to 30 June 23 as attached to this report. Would somebody care to move that? Thank you, Jocelyn. Second by Liz. Councillor Coe. All in favour, aye. Continue, carried. Okay. Now, I've just committed my first stuff up of the meeting under welcome by failing to acknowledge the presence of Arifia Roriti, our Mana Whenua representative for the first time. Kia ora, welcome, and my apology for not acknowledging you earlier, but we did have a chat. But welcome to your first meeting, okay? Okay. Thank you, and my apology again. All right. Audit Proposal, item 8.2. Mark, Sam Nichol, you're online somewhere, are you? Good show. Can we hear you? Do a voice test.
Hello, Chair.
Hello, Sam. I was about to say Sam Neill. I don't always think of Sam Neill when I think of Sam Nichol. Anyway, you're Sam Nichol, our auditor of Ernst & Young. Welcome. You've probably been warned that you are expected to make a very brief presentation because you sent the committee and the council two important documents. One is the audit proposal, and the other is the audit engagement letter. Of course, we did deal with you at the last meeting Sam, when we reviewed and accepted basically your proposed audit plan. But I'd like to invite you to take us just briefly through the two documents which are quite important, the audit proposal letter and the engagement letter. I might say that David and I have had discussions with Jan and Mark about this in more detail, and we are quite satisfied with it. But we'd like you to make that presentation. So I now invite you, Sam Nicol, to briefly speak to the reports that you have sent us. These will have to, once they are accepted, we'll have to refer these to the council, because the council has delegated authority. Well, we don't have delegated authority to approve this. It will have to go to council. So I will have to front up to council on behalf of this committee and persuade them, Sam, that what you're proposing is all good and proper, okay? So over to you, Sam, if you'd like to proceed.
Right, thank you, Chair. So, as you said, after presenting the audit plan on sort of the nature and focus of our work at the last committee meeting, the remaining balance of the sort of lead-in work stream was our fee proposal and engagement letter. And if I deal with them in reverse order, the engagement letter is very standard. It's really the sort of auditing standard requirements about our respective roles and responsibilities as to the annual report. And so there's no elements to bring to your attention. It's tailored for local authorities, in particular Kapiti, and pretty straightforward and unchanged from what applied for the previous period. The second letter is the audit proposal letter. So the Auditor General, as you know, is the auditor of all public entities, including Kapiti District Council, and he's appointed me and the resources of Ernst & Young on his behalf to complete the audit. This is at the end of a 3-year cycle, so we're required to renew and agree fees for the coming 3-year period, being the years ending 2023, 2024 and 2025. So the fee setting process is led by us but moderated by the Auditor General. It's a very robust process, and I thought it would be helpful to share with the committee the key features. The Director of Auditor Appointments in the Auditor General's office moderates and analyses the proposed rates and hours across their wider portfolio, including entities not audited by EY. And this allows them to benchmark rates and effort and challenge the proposed fees we're setting that arise from our understanding of the work and discussions with management. So that process has been completed, and they've confirmed that the proposed fee adoptable is within an acceptable range from their perspective. But it's really an important step, because you're one of many local authorities all under the Auditor General's remit. And so they bring that understanding to bear as they work through our proposed fees. And the letter provides really good structure, and I've just sought to be quite transparent. So we provide a little bit of history back to the 2020 year of the budgeted hours in the assumed letter, the actual hours taken, and the trend over time, as well as accounting for the differences in an aggregate sense between the 2022 actuals and the budget. There's always a range of factors that account for sort of the unders and overs. Coming new into the role, I've sought to understand those, but really the key takeaways for me is I've desired to strike a balance of setting a target hours for me and the team that's reasonable with reference to sort of budgets we've established before, and also take account of scope changes that were required to deal with alongside council, both in the nature of our work and the changing context in which council operates and reports. But what you'll see is the proposed hours for the future years are well below the actual hours we incurred in 2022, so we've borne the cost of that. And in the scope changes we detail, there's some elements that we think are recurring that weren't adequately accounted for in the brought forward hours, so we pick them up. Look, and from there, that's really an overview. And Chair, you've sort of provided a summary of key elements of process, but open to questions from the committee on the paper if there was any information you need to move that process forward.
Thank you very much, Sam. Let me see who wants to speak. Firstly, Jocelyn, and you could take the questions in order as they come, Sam, right?
Over here.
Sorry, Liz, there's something wrong with my head.
You're
doesn't
colourblind.
My head doesn't turn left as well as it does right. So my head now turns left, and I call you first, Jocelyn.
Liz, yeah.
Liz,
Okay,
sorry.
thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, just a very quick question. In terms of the efficiency of the audit process, is there, in your view, any room for improvement in terms of council's role in the process that would help drive greater efficiency?
We've had very good engagement from council. I'm new, so I'm entering sort of the audit relationship with Kapiti for the first time. So, you know, part of the focus has been getting to know the responsible team members and putting plans in place. As it's early August, we're in later in the month to really get on with the year-end audit work. But to date, you know, very satisfied with sort of the processes and structures in place. The reality is there'll always be something, but I think, you know, we'll work through that as the need arises and reflect at the end of the audit. But you know, well placed, I suppose, is the message, caveated by sort of where we are with my own experience with Kapiti.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you for being available to answer any questions. So my question relates to drinking water on page 21. There's a explanation there about how that drinking water is assessed externally and now it's been brought into this auditing process. I'm just wondering whether that's actually a legal requirement or that's resulted in some other reasoning, and whether or not there's actually a change in cost by bringing it into the auditing process, please.
Yeah, thank you. So look, water, this is a sector-wide challenge for local authorities. The Department of Internal Affairs establishes some mandatory performance measures that exist across councils, and they reference to drinking water standards. So there's been a number of changes as to those, and if I just call out the key ones, and approximately November, December 2021, Ministry of Health ceased having responsibility for drinking water and a new independent regulator was established. In November, December 22, that new regulator imposed its own drinking water standards. And so those changes impact how council, you know, who council's responsible to in respect of drinking water and the standards which apply. And the sector-wide issue I refer to is there was a real challenge last year in terms of the changes with Ministry of Health and the way auditors generally had developed, obtaining audit evidence about what councils do that was interrelated with the drinking water assessors that lived under the Ministry of Health umbrella. That went away. And so there were two sort of elements from that. We had to look at how we get the evidence we need to assess it in absence of what we'd used before. And that involved different testing and also understanding the changes. And so we've included that as a scope change for the forthcoming year, because whilst we still audit the subject matter, the hours we set in for the 2020, 21 and 22 audits didn't contemplate the level of effort required that arises both out of those changes, and that it's been an area of focus for the sector in their audits for the June 22 year that said, hey, here's some things you need to think about as we attack it in a different way. So they're the key changes that sit behind that. In discussions, planning and working through these changes for Kapiti, it's well served by having its own laboratory that's independently accredited, but the nature of the work we need to do has evolved, and we need to capture the cost of that effort in the audit fee.
Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions? Okay, in that case, thank you very much for that presentation and answering the questions, Mark. Sam, I mean. And I will move, when I find the right page, I will move that the committee receives and notes the report, that the committee notes the Ernst & Young audit fees on behalf of the Auditor General for 2023, 24 and 25 financial years, as per the attachment, that the committee notes the Ernst & Young audit engagement letter dated 27 June on behalf of the Auditor General for the years ending 30 June 2023, 24, 25, as per attachment 2, and that the committee confirms the Ernst & Young audit fees and audit engagement letter on behalf of the Auditor General and recommends approval to the Council at its next appropriate meeting. Right? Would somebody please move? I think it's David's turn. No, 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 it's your turn. You move, and I'll second. All right? Okay. Moved by David and second by David. All in favour, say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Okay. Thank you very much. Sam, of course, we are hoping you will have the pleasure of your company for one or two of the other items here. Is that the case?
Yeah, look, happy to stay for items if you'd like me to do so. And my plan was on other items just to get a debrief from management and catch up on the replay.
Well, we're just talking about
things
the
like
next item, perhaps, and well, look, it's your call, or it's your call anyway. All right.
No, I've got time to stay now if you'd like to carry on.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So we now move to progress update regarding audit control findings. Sharon is going to take us through this. Oh, Mark's going to do it. Right. Just to say, this is a regular process of follow-up. When these issues are raised, they are dealt with seriatim until they're finished, and it sometimes takes time to work the way through them. So this is a continuing and ongoing process. Mark, do you want to say anything at all, or do you want to take the reports as read?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, it's a short report. There's five open items that are all but complete, apart from 2 actions. And as the report says, that as part of the audit for 22-23, EY need to check those progress updates, and it's for them to close out. So happy to take the report as read and go straight to questions.
All right. Are there any questions? Jocelyn, yes?
Thank you, through the chair. I was hoping that someone else was going to ask a question as well. In relation to, on page 43, it talks about that this relates to the accuracy of responses and resolution times. I just would like to sort of have some clarity about whether this includes the type of the request for information, and whether it includes Official Information Act requests, and how those two are brought together when they are emailed in or sent in.
Thank you. Yes. Mark, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, certainly. So this control finding relates to service requests that come through our service request channel. So it doesn't relate to official information requests at all. It's just we have a number of performance measures. Some of them are defined by how quickly we actually respond to an incident, and some of them are measured by how long it takes to actually resolve the issue. So the point that was raised is that during last year's audit, within the service request system itself, there's a number of fields where you can put response time or resolution time, and there were a couple of instances where those 2 fields were incorrectly completed. So what the team has done is spend some time just trying to simplify those fields, do some training, and put some more controls around the process. So it's completely separate from official information requests. These are normally public requests that have seen something out in the field, and the council needs to go and respond and have a look.
So thank you. A supplementary question. I know as elected members, we often are asked to, I suppose, get involved in some service requests, and we may well email those in to whoever. Are they then forwarded on as a service request, or how are they dealt with? So it's actually captured within, like service requests get a number. Do these also get a number, or how's that dealt with? Because often they actually relate to service requests that might still be outstanding.
Is that a question for you, Mark, or does it require an answer from somebody else?
Look, I can certainly try and answer the question. So that this particular finding relates to everything that's in the service request system. So there are different ways and means of getting stuff logged in the service request. There's the Antenno app. There's also a couple of these main phone lines. So generally speaking, when council receives requests for service, it does get logged into the system. When it's logged into the system, that's what our auditors actually audit. So they do sample testing.
Okay, so obviously in Tino emails, just to clarify, they are included, sent to the service request process? Or
Yes,
not?
they are.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? No. In that case, I move that the committee notes the progress update regarding Ernst & Young's report on control findings for the year ended 30th June 22, including Appendix 1 of this report, and notes that Ernst & Young will reassess these as part of their audit for the year ended 30th June 2023. Will somebody move that, please? Whose turn? Anyone? Thank you, Glenn. Somebody? Thank you, Liz. You can beat it. In favour, say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Okay. Now, here we come to the Treasury Compliance Report. Jing, do you want to come up to the table for this? It might be so we can see you properly, right? And Marcus here as well. We can take it as read, except I'd just like to make the comment that it has an obvious connection with another item on the agenda, which is the credit rating. The quality of our Treasury management is an important component in what Standard & Poor's think of us, right? So we can talk about that a bit later on under that separate item on the agenda. But in your hands, we can either take it as read, or if you want to draw anything to our attention, Jing, feel free. Right? Okay, we'll take it as read. David and I have had an opportunity through the pre-meeting preparation to have a look at it and raised a few queries and clarified a few things for ourselves. But I mean, it's the ratings report indicates the favourable way in which our Treasury management is regarded by them anyway, although the metrics that they use are slightly different. Are there any questions on this? Liz, first of all.
Oh, you got it right.
Well, I'm learning. I'm learning, Liz. I'm learning.
Oh,
It'll
just
be
really,
time.
do we need to be worried about the rising level of debt? Was my concern. How do we feel about that?
How do we feel about the rising level of debt?
Perhaps
Well, this
the
is
CE might like to comment. Thank you.
Very emotive. Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks for the question. So the pessimist in me would say yes, concerned about the rising level of debt. But the optimist in me would suggest that the debt is being incurred due to the capital works program that we have ahead of us in the current long-term plan, which is about enabling growth after a period of perhaps where we have not been so forward-thinking in how we ensure that the district is set for growth. The challenge is that the cost of delivering on our capital works program, and in fact running the organisation, is going up at a greater pace than anticipated, especially on the back of coming out of COVID, where there was a real appetite, I think, to ensure that we were fit for growth and the expansion that might come following being in lockdown for such an extended period of time. On the back of that, we've seen an increase or a rise in inflation and increase in interest rates, which, whilst not at a market level for us, still have an impact on our balance sheet. So the challenge for us and the challenge for this council as we embark on the next long-term plan will be to understand the balance between growth, balancing debt and revenue. You know, that really is a key for us, is revenue. And of course the certainty or uncertainty, as some may say, of what is affordable waters, and that might mean what that might mean for our balance sheet, which could be quite favourable. But of course, with that goes about 35% of our business and a percentage of revenue. but of course goes the requirement to fund that work as well. So there's some benefits there. So yes, concern, but at the same time aware of the need to allow for growth.
The chair would like to add a brief comment for what it's worth, and relate to that in particular to the report on credit rating. I mean, obviously all of the debt is being used for capital expenditure. So one of the key issues is the quality of this capital expenditure, the extent to which it's been properly managed and cost overruns are being avoided and so forth. I think the second issue, noting that the AA rating is still good, but there's a negative. It has a negative forecast, and the negative forecast relates both to the size of the debt and the rate at which it's increasing, but also to the fact that substantially capital expenditure is being funded by debt rather than by internal sources like depreciation or development charges or whatever else. And that's what you can see when you look at the Standard & Poor's report, that there is there has been an increased percentage use of debt as opposed to internal sources for funding, which is partly why there's reference in the Standard & Poor's rating report to the negative outlook. So I just thought that comment should be added. Right. Anybody else? No? Well, it looks like everybody's happy, Jing. All right. Thank you very much. Let me just find what I'm supposed to be recommending here. The Risk and Assurance Committee notes the Council's full compliance with its Treasury management policy for the 3 months ended 30th of June 2023. All right. Who will move that? Whose turn now? Thank you. Moved by the Mayor. Janet, thank you. Seconded by David Cochrane. It's his turn, right? Okay. All in favour, say aye. Continue. Carried. Okay. Right. Next item. Council insurance update. Oh, well, here we are, and we've got Sam Ketley online. Sam, hello. You are in Auckland, I think, right? Hello. I hope he's there.
Yes.
Are you there, Sam? Just be to do a check because I'd like to make a few comments. But Sam is. Hello, Sam. Hello, you with us, Sam?
I am. Can you hear me?
We can indeed. I was just going to introduce you. Thank you very much. We're having very much a Sam day today. Sam Nicol and Sam Kelly, which is fine. You can't have too many.
Makes it easier.
Right. I was just going to make an introductory comment, Sam, before I invited you to take us through some of these issues. This is quite a complex paper, but it's actually a very important paper, I think. It's a new item for our agenda, and it's part of a program of work which is ongoing and which will need to be developed for decision at the November meeting or subsequently after that for some decisions to be made leading forth into 2024. Sam, I'm sure you can tell us all about the problems of the insurance industry, but we need to look at, I think this item has been on the agenda before in the previous triennium, just by way of information, but now we're faced with some issues, Sam, as to what we should be doing in terms of putting in place, given the current insurance market environment, what we might be able to put in place to make our insurance position more tenable and reduce costs and all that sort of thing. So with that in mind, Sam, I'd like to say thank you very much for taking the time to participate, and I'd like you to take us through what presentation you would like to give us concerning the issues in this paper.
For sure, and thank you very much for the introduction. So let me just share. Okay.
Right. Can we increase the size of that somehow?
How about that?
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
now we're cooking.
Just about okay.
Okay. Okay. So I've got Mark asked me to talk for 10-15 minutes, which I'll do. So there are 10 slides, but I can rattle through them fairly quickly. I will try and keep it as simple as I can. I do acknowledge this can be quite complex, and it's obviously an area that's probably not your expertise. So certainly after this, I'm happy to answer any questions. So you're spot on. The insurance market is, talking to anyone who's got grey hairs than me, at the moment is saying it's the hardest market they've ever seen. So it is particularly tough. So I'm going to go through that, explain that a little bit more, and then talk to you around what Mark and I have been working on for several months and why it's important and how it can help you going forwards. So just the markets where we are. Just going to talk to mainly what we call it material damage business interruption. That's the majority of your premium spend. So I'm only going to really focus on that today. I'm going to talk about a key part of insurance is actually reinsurance. This is the insurers of the insurers. So that they provide fundamentally the capital that you then go and buy from the insurers. So it's really important to understand the reinsurance piece. And then look at some of the issues that are driving and compounding some of these problems. Then very quick look at what's the outcome of what's happened earlier this year. And then just to really top it off, talk about future headwinds that are about to hit us as well, which is, so none of it's good news as such, but the next stage of the presentation, talking about how we're looking to deal with it, will hopefully bring you some thoughts around how we can deal with this going forwards. So from a reinsurance perspective and insurance perspective, insurers are driven by losses. That's, they look backwards and they project forwards. And the key thing that I want to show you in this slide is you can see some really big spikes. Their primary perils are things like earthquakes. You'll see 2011, that was the Christchurch event. So these are global losses. And you can see 2005, that was Hurricane Katrina. And then there's other events that have gone through. The interesting line here is not the primary events. It's actually what is this called the secondary perils. And this is what's driving the issues and the changes in the insurance market at the moment. So these are your floods and your storms and your hailstorms. So this is more climate related. And the issue with climate change is that those losses are outpacing the primary losses now. So insurers are becoming very, very aware of these issues, and the cost of capital is therefore increasing. What is also then compounding that is this issue. So globally, we have reinsurance, and you can see there the material damage global insurance is about 675 billion in 2021, and the final bar there dropped. And the reason for that is with interest rate rises, a lot of capital that was being put in by big providers of capital for a better gain than they would get from the banks, they decided the banks were now a better marketplace for their money. So they withdrew their money from the reinsurance markets and put it into safer bets than losing it on insurance. So that was a big driver in the reduction of capital last year. A big part sort of fell away at the end of last year, so that's driving issues this year. The good news is actually there's now an uptick in that reinsurance. So there is a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, specifically on that. The next thing is what happened with Cyclone Gabriel and the Auckland floods. It's just a big shock event for New Zealand, another one on top of everything else we've dealt with, and a real indicator of potential losses in the future that we could be sustaining. The good news is, I suppose, is that the weather cycle is changing. We're going from the cold wet cycle to the hot dry cycle, and we're seeing that across Europe at the moment. And we can expect to see a very hot summer this year. But that's also going to drive other types of losses and events like wildfires in Australia. So, watch this space. But the insurers and the insurance markets are very aware. And you'll start seeing it in ways that how they treat clients who've got flood exposure or wildfire exposure. So the future headwinds for you to be aware of, the big one is the update to the seismic hazard model that was released by GNS last year, end of 2022. So this is really changing the way our understanding of the underlying hazard in New Zealand from seismic risk. It is a fantastic piece of work. Incredible science has gone into it. The problem is it's increasing the hazard for shaking, particularly by approximately 50% across New Zealand. That's relevant for Kapiti Coast because if the shaking hazard increases for yourselves, it means that the secondary perils of liquefaction, lateral spread are potentially more likely, and therefore losses associated with earthquake can also increase. So we're trying to get to grips with what this actually means, and so are the insurers. The good news at the moment is it's not actually being adopted into the insurance understanding. The bad news is that will happen over the next 6 to 12 months. So this is going to put more pressure on the market. But we are working very, very hard on giving clients that understanding. And one of the pieces of work that we're doing with yourselves at the moment is an update to your loss modeling for your building portfolio and asset portfolio, so we can understand what the impacts of that are. And then the last point there is we are struggling globally with capital, and in particular, we're not finding any real new markets coming into New Zealand. This is something we're trying to address by other means. This is not something we're just letting happen idly, but we just wanted to say that, you know, new insurance capital is tough at the moment, and so we're fighting for whatever we can get for New Zealand. So that's sort of a snapshot of the insurance market. I hope I haven't lost you already, and that makes sense. I'm just going to quickly jump into a key thing here about the days of just going and buying insurance, just whatever, you know, is off the shelf. Those days are sort of gone. We've got to become far more smart in how we approach the insurance market and are looking at all the options. And a key thing here, and this is part of the work that we've already done, is part of that is you need to understand what risks you can wear yourselves and carry that risk because you might be forced to. If there isn't insurance available, you've got to see what you can actually wear before you start looking at alternatives. So this piece of work is one that we've already undertaken for KCDC, which is, we call it a risk tolerance analysis, or a risk-bearing and understanding of the risk-bearing capacity. So that piece of work's being done. So we've got an understanding of how much you could wear as an organization. Obviously, risk tolerance can be different to your risk appetite, but it's important for you to understand, you know, the overall footprint of what you're operating within before we start looking at the options of what you take as a self-insured retention or a captive or whatever. So this is quite a complex diagram. I'll try and keep it easy. So the one on the left-hand side in all the grays is a typical insurance placement, and it's built these days by components of capital that gives you the 100%. So you've got layers which go from top to bottom called quota share. You've got layers at the top called excess layers. You've got layers at the bottom called primary layers. The most expensive layers are primary layers. Quota share is a blend of rate between the top and the bottom, and insurers play in different areas depending on their appetite for risk themselves. So that's a traditional policy. What's happening today is quite often in clients in Wellington in particular, those areas in red are ventilated components. So in the right-hand side, those boxes, it might be they are unable to fulfill their placement, or they may decide that the capacity is particularly expensive. They don't want to spend that much. It's not affordable. It's not economic. They'll self-insure. So that's either a choice or it's imposed, but programs are becoming what we call ventilated. What we're saying to clients is two things to be considering. That captive managed fund at the bottom end can remove that expensive primary layer. And if you take that risk on yourselves over a long period of time, it reduces the total cost of risk, because you're not paying the insurer's profit. You're reducing some of the operating costs. You're taking those yourselves. So there are benefits for having that retention, and also, but the issue with it is that it's also the most likely exposed layer to loss. So if a loss goes through your deductible, the first layer it hits is your managed fund. So you've got to make sure that you've got the capital, the risk-bearing capacity to wear that risk or recapitalize it as needed. And finally, I'm not going to spend any time on this at all, but there are other options called parametrics which are out there. That's a conversation for another day. But again, these are other sources of capital if we start seeing further retreat from insurance. So one of the things we're doing, and I mentioned briefly, was that loss modeling piece. Understanding the severity of loss so you can understand your limits, and then looking at what you need to understand about frequency loss is about the captive, because you need to understand how often losses are likely to occur and how often your capital is going to be eroded, or how many times you might be called upon to recapitalize your fund. So we helped set up the managed fund for Auckland Council as part of their strategy around risk transfer. Obviously, the anniversary floods that came through a couple of months after it was all set up utilise that entire fund immediately. So it worked, but it has meant that Auckland Council have had to recapitalise that fund. So that just sort of ties in how risk understanding informs the program structure that you take, but also you need to understand what is your tolerance and capability in your balance sheet to sort of help fund whatever option you've got available. So just to give you a quick summary update, this is where we're at. So we've done the risk-bearing capacity and risk tolerance study. We're in the process of updating the loss modelling to include the update from the National Seismic Hazard Model update, which is and latest value. So that's really essential for you to understand what you need to buy as limit, either part of the group or individually. And then once we've got that information and we've got some ideas around whether it's a captive, protected cell or managed fund, the recommendation at the moment is likely to be a managed fund. It's probably going to be the most cost-effective solution and the least onerous to yourselves. But if one of those options, if you're going to do that, requires the decision to either stay or withdraw from the Outer Wellington group of councils for insurance purchase. So we need to give you the costings and implications of both options so you can make a decision around what's best for yourselves. So the final slide, very quick wrap up. Insurance market is incredibly tough. Unfortunately, we don't see any real improvement in the time being. We are seeing slight changes. There's more capacity coming into London, but globally, everyone's going to London. So that capital is there, but everyone's using it. We are highly recommending that every single client starts thinking about their approach to risk transfer. It's really important. If you're a price taker, at the moment, you're going to be paying a lot. So you need to really think about that. And then the risk retention vehicles, those captive, managed fund, protected cell, they're really good options. Parametrics, another one, not always cost effective, but all those options need to be considered, and that's the bit of work that we've been doing with Mark. So at that point, I will stop presenting and take any questions.
Thank you, Sam. Before we do that, because I know you're working on this in conjunction with Mark. Mark, is there anything you want to add before we throw it over for general questions or discussions? Mark? He's not there. All right. We'll throw it open for general questions and discussions. Oh, he is. Mark,
I am here, Mr. Chair. Sorry.
I just said, would you like to, after that excellent presentation, I know you're working very closely with Sam on this, with a view to a more detailed discussion at the November meeting of this committee. But is there anything you wanted to add to that before we go into general questions?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I think Sam really covered it off well, and probably questions will pick up some more things. So thank you.
First of all, I give the call to the Mayor, and then Councillor Coe, and then Councillor Cooper. Actually, I'm going to use first names, by the way.
Do you want me to give it back? I can give it back. A couple of simple questions. Just on, thank you for the presentation. Just clarity for me, on page 67, if we're looking at the value of assets insured, I'll just make a comment and a question. It looks like we're undervalued for our assets. It doesn't look like a lot of money for what we have. That's just a comment. But my question is, am I reading it correct? If we have a region-wide earthquake, let's just say an 8+, and the WCIG are all impacted, so 4 regions impacted majorly, and that 600 million cap is spread between the 4 regions. My question is, that would be 150 million per region if it was divvied up evenly, which doesn't sound like much. But my second question is there an agreement between the WCIG partners on who gets what? So could say the Hut get 300 million and the rest is divvied up between the smaller councils?
Or who gets the first bite?
Yeah, who gets the first bite? So there's a lot in those questions, but yeah, that'd be good, thanks.
Probably we'll take these questions as they go, because otherwise we could, if it gets complex, they'll all mount up. So let's take that question now. Thank you very much. Sam?
Okay, so the answer to the first question is that's the reason we're doing the loss modelling. So that when we worked with the councils and agreed that original limit, it was done several years ago. And that's one of the reasons that the modelling has been updated to reflect that the value increase that's happened, but also the issue around the hazard increase. The interesting thing is that it's likely to require more capacity, which is obviously a problem in the current market. So that's a piece of work that's ongoing as we speak. That's also part of the consideration that if you go alone, the benefit is you could have a more tailored loss limit that's more suitable to yourselves, which will be probably a lot less than the overall grouping. But again, we don't know what you would need to buy until we've done the modelling and we've had a discussion with yourselves around how comfortable you are with the modelling work and also the proposed limit. With regards to the MOU that we'd normally expect, I can't remember off the top of my head if there is one, but I'm sure Mark knows the answer to that question.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Just a couple of things. So the question was, if there's a region-wide earthquake, is there an agreement between syndicate members how much you get paid out? So yes, there is for infrastructure assets and above ground assets. There's actually a ratio. There's a formula. So the most simplest agreement is that you can't get paid out more than your maximum probable loss. So each of the councils have maximum probable losses, and what we've heard from Sam today is that those were done a number of years ago. In fact, if memory serves me right, they were done back in 2014 or 2015 using the latest technology at the time. So you can't get more than your maximum probable loss. And if there's two or three councils experiencing losses at the same time, there is a formula. So which can disadvantage the councils. It just depends on who's had the most losses. And then just going back, put simply, look, was a fantastic observation. If we look at infrastructure assets, KCDC's assets, 884 million versus $600 million of group cover. If we went out to the market today, and I'm sure Sam will endorse what I'm saying, we struggle to get $600 million of cover on the open market today. We do have a maximum probable loss. Kapiti has a maximum probable loss of 130 million. That $600 million was done based on an earthquake in the Wellington region with the epicenter of the quake in Lower Hutt, and the total damage to Kapiti at the time was about 35 million. We did some more loss modelling with Sam, and potentially there can be an earthquake with the epicenter right in Paraparaumu, and if that event happened, we would have damage north of $130 million. So the other important point to just to raise, which is set out in the report, is with underground assets, there's the 60-40 cost sharing with central government. So we only cover, or we insure 40% of the loss. Central government do the remaining 60%, but anything over and above our maximum probable loss is for the council's account. So again, just another good reason why we're working with Sam to update our loss modelling. And with the Affordable Waters program, my understanding is that Treasury are looking to do away with the 60-40 cost sharing split anyway. So we've got some challenges going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Sorry, through Chair, just a follow-up question. So with that MOU around a matrix of who's got the most expensive assets, so it would make sense for us then to not only know what our assets are, but to have an audit of the WCIG partners' assets to know where we would fall. Is that being done as part of our process?
Yeah, so look, one of the rules, so we've been in the syndicate for some time. So for below ground, we're called Outer Wellington, and for above ground, we're called the Wellington Combined. So sort of a foundation rule has always been, when you're in it completely. We do the loss modelling, we do our audits, we do our insurance valuations on top of accounting valuations, and we share all the information with Aon and ourselves, so that all syndicate members have got assurance that we know the state and condition of each other's assets, so we're effectively trying to de-risk each other.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. Cheers.
Just if I could add one comment to that as well, the modelling will take into account each individual council as well as the group. So it'll give the answers that everyone needs with regards to what the programme structure should be going forwards.
So a little bit of a comment and a question. So you talked about Auckland's self-insurance fund. For us, that's quite challenging in terms of capitalising and then recapitalising those funds. We have tried once before to create a fund by investing using debt, and that wasn't palatable for our community, though there was quite a lot of work put into it at the time and would have reaped quite enormous benefits by now, actually. But are we still looking at that? Anything, I guess, not similar to that, based on what we heard last time, but are there any other options in terms of boosting our self-insurance funding?
I think that calls, first of all, for a comment from you, Mark, I think, right?
Yes, certainly. So, look, absolutely, we are looking at a number of finance options, knowing full well what happened a few years ago and what the reaction from the community was, as well as the Office of the Auditor General. So, for that reason, we're working with Aon to look at a captive, which effectively is a standalone insurance company. The council would have its own insurance company. But as a standalone entity, if KCDC were to do it itself, we just don't have the scale. It doesn't warrant our own insurance company. Transpower has its own captive. Wellington Airport has its own captive. Auckland Council looked at a captive and decided it didn't want to do a captive. Something very similar to a captive, not a managed fund, but similar to a captive is what's called a protected cell. We're having a look at that. That's got pros and cons, and that'll be brought back to the table. But look, by far and large, I think time has actually moved on. Since Kapiti Coast District Council floated the idea of an investment fund, I think the insurance market has tightened up year on year. Insurance premiums are heading north of $400,000 a year. More and more councils are looking at self-insurance funds. And one of the concerns about a self-insurance fund is how easily you could probably use those funds just to pay for BAU. So in terms of the sector is moving towards what we're calling a managed fund. So it's a self-insurance fund. It needs to have the scalability. How big does that fund need to be? We don't know. That's the work that Sam's doing on the loss modelling. But the sector is certainly more open to a managed fund and investing that money so that ratepayers aren't just paying increased insurance premiums year on year, that they're actually getting a benefit of the fund being managed externally by experts and the benefit of reduced insurance premiums because we're more attractive to underwriters. Over. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I have one more question? So the report talks about the arrangements we have with our neighbouring councils. Have we thought about going into partnership with any other organisations? I'm thinking, for instance, Electra.
The short answer of that is no. What I said earlier is the foundation principle with our syndicate is we all do the same thing. We're all in it together. When we're advised by Aon to do loss modelling or to do various work or risk analysis, we all do it. The syndicate isn't quite playing by those rules. We're the only ones in the syndicate that are looking at protective cells, captives and self-insurance funds. Greater Wellington Regional Council already has one. They're looking at having theirs managed externally. But as far as everyone else is concerned, they aren't looking at alternative finance vehicles like we are. And so if we stay in the syndicate and we did put in place a self-insurance fund, if that was the will of the council and we had reduced insurance rates, then the syndicate benefits without us taking on the risk. We haven't looked at joining forces with commercial entities. We're actually at this point in time just looking at what is the benefit to our ratepayers if we did something different and if we stayed in the syndicate versus if we stood alone.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm one of those people that was opposed to the managed fund concept. I'll have to admit that conflict of interest at the start. But look, I have a couple of questions about self-insurance, which I think, by the way, is a really good idea. I'm not familiar with the terms, captive and, what was the other one? Protective cell?
Protected cell.
Yep. But so I don't know. Yeah, I'd like to know what they are at some point. I just wonder whether, well, two questions. One is, can we, rather than fund this by way of investing funds, by earmarking some of our borrowing capacity to cover any potential losses, so that you'd basically reduce your borrowing cap to leave some unused capacity in the event that there's a disaster, as opposed to doing investments which have all that risk associated with them. And secondly, can we not widen the net in terms of self-insurance? Following on from what Janet said, working with other councils, or why does LGNZ itself not set up its own kind of insurance company, if you like, to cover off these things? We were finding it difficult to buy insurance cover.
Thank you, Liz.
There's
I'll
two
ask,
questions in one.
yeah, I'll ask Mark to respond first, but Sam, you might also have some broader perspectives to add to that issue as well. All right.
I'll go first, Sam. Sam could do a better job than me simply explaining a captive versus a protected cell. They've essentially the same thing, but one's a bit of an easier vehicle. Look, certainly with self-insurance, you get a self-insurance fund and you get a managed fund. And a self-insurance fund, that's exactly sort of the options that we're exploring. So we've got what's called a contingency fund, which is an equity reserve on our balance sheet. We rate fund $150,000 per year, and we grow the fund unless we have an insured loss, and we make provision for $250,000 of capex, and we grow that. That just builds up year on year if it's not used. So that's one way of doing it. So that's not cash. That's an equity reserve. Uninsured losses are generally losses that are below our deductibles. On our below ground assets, our deductible is $1 million per event, and with the above ground assets, if it's through an earthquake, it's 5% of the sum insured value. And I think the report says that our above ground assets are worth $285 million. The protected cell conversations with Sam, one of the ways of doing it is not to put any money in, but to have a line of credit or a guarantee.
Well,
Self-insurance fund.
This was my
Self-insurance fund can have a line of credit. We certainly could ring fence some of our debt capacity as a guarantee. The most important thing is we have to make ourselves more attractive than all the other councils that are seeking insurance. And so when you go to London, what underwriters are looking for is they're looking for mechanisms that de-risk their risk. We've heard from Sam that reinsurance is the insurance for insurers, which is getting harder. So a line of credit or a guarantee from us for an event that hasn't happened is not as solid and not appealing to them as, for example, a managed fund. So we have to weigh that all up. And this isn't easy. And what the report also said is we did quite a lot of work on protected cells, and it was actually showing there were real tangible benefits to the council from entering into a protected cell, but a lot of those benefits were from our infrastructure assets. So we were starting to see quite substantial reduction in premiums or insurance rates for our infrastructure assets. Now that's going to go because we're going to transfer our infrastructure assets to Entity G, which means the protected cell isn't going to be delivering us the savings that we thought. So this isn't easy stuff. There are a number of options. I would say at the moment, I know Taupo District Council are certainly looking at a self-insurance fund. As I said, Greater Wellington Regional Council have got one. They want that managed externally. Napier are looking at one. So lots of councils are actually looking to put cash into a self-insurance fund because that's that primary layer. Effectively, you replace that primary layer. Over to you, Sam.
Thanks, Mark. You did very well. You've obviously been listening. So yeah, basically a captive is a wholly owned subsidiary of the council, but it's an insurance company. So the issues with a captive is you have to have a board of directors. It has to be, it's governed by the rules of the domicile that it's in. So if you set it up within New Zealand, it's the same rules as any other insurance company. So it can be particularly onerous. So captives are often domiciled in countries overseas outside of New Zealand to make it a bit easier for the legal and regulatory requirements. That in itself can be an issue because obviously then you're owning something that's overseas. So a protected cell, the captive is just, it's your insurance company and you can capitalize it and all the rest of it. The only issue is if you've got long tail risks, liability risks, it's like an insurance company. It's got to go into runoff and it can be 10 or 15 years of runoff and you've got that cost and expense as you're running it off. So big setup costs, big runoff costs, but long term, they're a very long term play, 10, 15, 20 years, they can really bring benefit. Protected cell is somebody else does all the regulation side, the management side, the account side, the claims piece. It's just your money that's sat in there. The issue with the protected cell is, as Mark has alluded to, you've got to fully capitalize that because it's you're a cell. There's 300 cells in the same company. You can't. Then nobody's subsidizing. It's your little cell. So it operates in the same way as a captive, but without the management costs. But these are issues because they, again, protected cells are offshore. So it's how that is perceived. So they are good vehicles, good long-term vehicles for reducing total cost. They do have definite upsides, but they do have downsides.
I guess the issue is just putting capital in the first place. The issue is just, getting that cash in up front. If you're having to borrow in order to do that, then you're relying on investment returns to offset that borrowing. It's not a good block, and that's where it came unstuck last time.
So one of the things about a captive is, as an insurance company, you don't have to capitalize it 100%. As long as you've got a plan, so you can build it up over time.
Right.
And a key part of the analysis is actually looking at the premium saving over the long term, and that money is retained within the captive, protected cell or managed fund to help speed up the build of that fund.
So can we not?
And obviously that.
Can we not do something like that with other councils or through LGNZ? Is that an option?
Okay.
Oh, look, I might try and comment on that. So, look, we probably could. It certainly wasn't in the LGNZ remits. All the councils in the same boat with insurance. We're all struggling with insurance. So it is surprising that there isn't a local government captive already in place.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to be on the radar.
Why not?
I mean, we've done well by having a shared service insurance syndicate in place within the Wellington region. We would love it if our syndicate were all in this together. But even our syndicate, some of the councils, just aren't interested in exploring these options. They're just wanting to insure like they have been in the past.
I just say that this has been kind of done before with Civic and LAP previously, and certainly last year we were discussing at high level with LGNZ on what are the options, because we could see what was coming, and we were wanting to get a conversation. But Mark's just alluded to the key point. A lot of councils, every council's at different state of risk maturity, approach to risk transfer. although you do the same thing, your risk profiles are very, very different across the country. And there are real issues around how would a council that's lower risk than you feel about going into a group with yourselves where, potentially they are subsidizing you. So there's all those issues you've got to balance between different risk profiles across the country. And obviously the dominant entity is Auckland. They get away with a very low rate for earthquake, and I know Mark's probably going to smile at that point. But it's interesting how that, now they're certainly going to start seeing a much higher flood rate for obvious reasons. So, these things, we do need to start looking at mutualizing of risk on a national basis. And it needs to be a joined up conversation and a thought process. Very keen to see that. At the moment, there is nobody championing it. That's the only problem.
Okay, corruptions in Auckland.
Yes, that's the biggest risk.
Cam, then Jocelyn, and then David. Then I think we might try and wrap it up. I mean, this is really a very rich discussion, but we will be coming back to it again in November. Where you go, Cam?
Cool. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora, Sam. Just a quick question for you. At the moment, Kapiti is going through a bit of a coastal adaptation look-see, which is causing some people some angst. From the insurance point of view, given that we have council assets which are in the in that coastal range, are we going to see some of those coastal assets be rated at a higher premium, or at some point in time do you think we're going to see them being uninsurable due to damage and sea level rise? I know it's a bit of crystal ball gazing, but
it is honestly. So the first step you'll see with the insurance sector and insurers is if they know there's an issue coming, the rates go up, then they start limiting their capacity, then they start withdrawing their capacity. So it doesn't happen overnight generally, but we are definitely seeing that insurers globally are being much more cautious with regards to where they're deploying capacity. Right. And if you consider what's happening in the US, there are residential insurers in the state of Florida that are no longer providing cover for hurricanes. Yeah. And if you go to California, there are insurers who are basically saying that's it, there's no more capacity. That's because of the earthquake and wildfire risk. So that's a long answer, but the short answer is eventually, yes, you'll start seeing insurers going to where it's not a known. Fundamentally, insurance is about providing cover for the unexpected. It can happen, it's unlikely to happen, we'll give you cover. But if it's likely to happen and likely to happen every year, they're not going to provide it. So you've got time, but this is the whole thing about this whole strategy. It's around sustaining the insurance arrangement as long as possible and giving you time and options to adapt physically or enable retreat. And there's certainly conversations that I'm involved in around how do we incentivize and enable retreat from areas where we've obviously got issues and we can't sustain the risk transfer. And if you can't sustain risk transfer, you can't get finance, and it's a quick spiral after that.
Yep, excellent. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you. Through the chair, thank you, Sam. Excellent comments. So mine actually is sort of similar to Cam's, but it's on a slightly different tack. So I sort of wanted to, I suppose, note the future headwinds that you'd listed there. And I suppose one of the things that this council is starting to talk about is managed retreat. And I suppose, the various things have been talked about today, like risk transfer, self-assurance, and insurance loss events, and the insuring for the unexpected. But I suppose my view, my question here is in relation to potential managed retreat, which could be down the line sometime. But in terms of the risk that a KCDC might be in terms of where properties have been, I suppose, have been built in areas where KCDC have said, and if that managed retreat has occurred, how potentially could that be managed, and whether there are any other councils who are actually really grappling with this now. I suppose it's their liability on KCDC in terms of allowing houses to be built in areas which either are flood prone or potentially could be the result of managed retreat.
Yeah, the liability issue is an interesting one. It's not. That's probably quite a long answer that we probably don't have time to go into in full detail. What I would say is that the issue, it's unclear at this point in time is who's going to be responsible for that. Is it going to be local government or central government? And when was this known? And it's interesting. It's one of those things that people often want to be in these areas that are exposed because of the view or whatever, and then complain when they find out it's actually exposed to certain perils. So it's where does it sit, that liability? I think at this point in time, it's hard to know exactly. It's certainly something that we're aware of and discussing, and it's certainly at a high level. It's not kicked in yet, but we're just going to wait to see when court cases start being pushed forward, and that we are starting to see them globally and starting to see some locally. With regards to councils and how they're managing it, handling it, again, it's the Hawke's Bay region is doing a lot at the moment, has done a lot. And it was interesting to see that central government stepped in with, I think it was Hastings District, or it was either Hastings or Napier, and the Hawke's Bay Regional Council stepped in to buy people out, which I thought was a very dangerous precedent to set, by the way. And Auckland Council's doing the same thing, buying people out of the flood-prone areas, and the central government has just said they're going to spend millions of dollars buying people out of areas around the country. The problem we've got is we can't do that everywhere. So there's going to be winners and losers. So this is a really big issue. Insurance has got a part to play in it, but it's also the finance system. It's also central government with regards to the issue around central government policy, allowing, on one hand, not allowing you to build, and on another allowing it. So there's inconsistency in how policy's being applied. So this is a systemic problem. Councils are likely to be pulled into court cases. Whether or not that liability can be proven, that you are liable, unclear. But we have to look at systemic solutions.
Thank you. I think this will be a long conversation going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My two questions actually come from a discussion that you and I had the other day. As I see it, the district is long, skinny, wet and wobbly. And I'd just like to see what sort of base we're working from. It's really interesting to look at what we might do going forward, but do we have a good grasp, I guess, on two things? What sort of claims have we had on our insurers, and what do they look like compared with other councils? Are we higher, lower, different kind, or are we fairly typical, if there is a typical? And I guess the other thing, and this might be more for you, Mark, than for Sam, have we had significant matters, not petty ones, where we thought, oh, that'll be covered by insurance, and it turns out it wasn't. So we had an uninsured loss when we thought we had an insured loss, because that's the other side of this thing is you set up a system, you think it's great, and then when you make a claim, it doesn't respond for some reason. Either you're outside the definitions or you've done something wrong. So can you just deal with the claims and the uninsured things that we thought were insured?
What has been our record?
Yeah.
You're on mute, Mark.
He's gone.
I'm back. So thank you, David. Look, since our discussion on Monday, we've actually gone back to Aon and just asked for the claims history of what sort of losses have we actually had any payouts. So going back to 2016, we've actually only had one claim, and it relates to some flood damage on the Waikanae Memorial Hall. Other than that, we've actually had uninsured losses, which basically means that the total cost of the loss has actually been below the deductible. There haven't been that many, so we've successfully managed to fund that from our what we call the contingency fund, which is that reserve that builds up. So fortunately for Kapiti, we haven't had many claims. We haven't had many uninsured losses. We've certainly had our fair share of flood events. We've certainly had adverse weather events with tornadoes. But fortunately, They haven't been material in terms of dollars. So by accumulating that fund up, we've managed to balance the books. Your second question is: have there been any surprises? If I understand your question, have we needed insurance that we haven't had? And the answer to that is no. Every year we challenge Aon, constantly challenging Aon to make sure that we've got the right cover in place. And one of the things that we're constantly saying is, with the market tightening, we're looking at those deductibles and saying, look, instead of $1 million deductible, can we have a $3 million deductible like Hutt City does? And the reality is, with our assets and the nature of our district, the underwriters are looking for us to have a $6 million deductible. So we never quite go there. So for above ground assets, our deductibles are $50,000. That seems very sensible to me. Yes, we do get damage to our properties. Yes, it's not insured, but we're not talking large scale. So at the moment, I'm of the view, based on historic costs, that our deductibles are about right. And in terms of our insurance, our two biggest insurance policies is the MDBI, which is above ground assets. We've saved actually quite a lot of money by putting our residential assets into that portfolio, into MDBI. Other councils separately insure their residential assets, but we've actually made some premium savings on that. I think our residential assets are just over $30 million. So look, I'm really comfortable. I'm really comfortable how we've structured our insurance. I'm comfortable what we've got. I'm comfortable with the mix of what's insured offshore, what's insured domestically. I was delighted. I'm really happy that we've got our full cover for 2023. I've been working with Aon a long time, and it's getting harder and harder and harder. And so looking at alternative finance risking models is really just imperative, particularly for KCDC.
Thank you.
I'd like to close it off there. I think we've had a really good discussion and some really good questions. Sorry, Jing, I didn't acknowledge you as the author of this paper and see whether you wanted to make some other comments as well.
That's right. I know Mark probably mentioned already, there is the contingency funds that we reserve 150k every year. And in this year, actually, we have used it for some storm event we had in the district. So there was those fence build, there's road damage, so we have used a quote on the reserves this year. So in the annual report, you will see those numbers.
Yeah. That's quite small, yeah. All right, well, look, I want to thank Sam very much for your presentation, very useful. We'll circulate those slides, of course, to members of the committee. And it will be another item on our discussion for the November meeting. It'll give us time to think about it. I mean, I think the guts of it is on page 69, if we can all try and focus on that. And the bottom line there says, council's attractiveness to underwriters is substantially increased if these risk financing options provide them with a further layer of protection before they are required to pay any insurable claims. That's what we're really talking about here. And I think page 69, which I've read several times and beginning to get an understanding of it, is the key to really the issues that we're talking about. So, Sam, thank you very much for joining us from Auckland. Great, and we'll obviously look forward to talking to you further, okay? Thank you. Okay. The question now, sorry, I'm going to move this, don't I? I move that the Risk and Assurance Committee notes the Council's 2023 insurance renewals and the progress update regarding alternative risk financing options. Who would like to move? No, I'm moving that. I'll move that. Who's going to be the seconder? Mayor Janet. All in favour, aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Now, the question arises as to whether you would like a break now, whether you'd like to keep continuing. Let's be democratic. Who wants a 5-minute break, or who wants to continue? Just 5 minutes, right? Okay, I declare a 5-minute break. Okay. Well, that's what you do, isn't it? I control this, you know. I control this. You might be the mayor, but I control the breaks.
With you, there's no debate. No.
keep waiting for everybody to go,
No,
aye.
you've
And I
got it
said, no,
right.
gone done.
No debate.
People don't mind
Go on.
using first names.
No, I don't think so.
Anyway, okay.
Keep going till we get to the other ones.
Yes, indeed. You've got 4.5 minutes left.
Right, 4.5 minutes.